I had never been good at reading the signs, and I think that's exactly what led me here, sitting in the dimly lit kitchen at 3 a.m., staring at the two empty coffee mugs. One was mine, the other hers. But it wasn't the mugs that got me thinking. It was the fact that she hadn't come home. Not that she ever needed to explain herself, of course. Sophie had a way of living her life with a level of freedom that I could never quite replicate. She was an artist, and that meant unpredictability was her art form. But tonight was different. I sat in the silence, a creeping unease swirling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't the first time Sophie had been late, but something about tonight felt different. I wasn't even sure what was off. I couldn't pinpoint it. Maybe it was the fact that she hadn't texted me, or maybe it was the strange conversation we'd had before she left. All I knew was, for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just waiting for her to come back. I was waiting for something else. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I glanced at the clock. 3:12 a.m. The stillness was broken by the soft sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. A car. I quickly stood, heart racing, straining to hear the engine as it pulled to a stop. It wasn't the familiar sound of her car, though. No, this was different. I felt a strange chill sweep over me, as if the universe was pressing its thumb down on my chest. The front door clicked open, then shut. It wasn't the sound I'd grown accustomed to, the quiet squeak of her boots on the hardwood floor, her voice calling out a greeting as she dropped her keys. No, this time it was sharp, almost urgent. Too quick. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to go to the door or remain where I was. There was no good reason to suspect anything, but I felt a knot tighten in my gut. What was she doing out this late? Who else was involved? I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the space between us, and I wasn't sure I could ever get it back. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, moving slowly, carefully, as if afraid I might break something just by stepping into the hallway. The cold air hit me as I opened the door, and I instantly saw her car parked in the driveway. But something wasn't right. She wasn't standing there, and neither was anyone else. I stepped outside, looking down the dark street, my breath fogging up the cool air. There, at the edge of the driveway, was a black van I had never seen before. It sat with its engine off, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. I was about to turn back when the van door opened. A man stepped out, tall and slender, with a posture that spoke of control. He didn't look like anyone I knew. He looked like someone who didn't care about being noticed. In fact, he made no attempt to blend in with the shadows, no attempt to be discreet. He was there with purpose. The man stood by the back of the van for a few moments before moving toward the front door. He didn't knock. He didn't even look at the door. His movements were precise, deliberate. I felt my heart rate spike, and for a second, I thought about going back inside, locking the door, and pretending I hadn't seen anything. But something held me there, an instinct, a sense of inevitability. As I watched, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black envelope. It wasn't the type of thing you'd hand to anyone casually. There was something about it, the way he held it, the way his fingers lingered for a moment, that made it feel like it carried more weight than just paper and ink. I stood there, paralyzed by the moment, as he approached the door. The van's engine hummed back to life in the distance, the sound growing fainter as he rang the bell. The door opened. Sophie. She didn't flinch. She didn't seem surprised to see him. In fact, she seemed to be expecting him. There was no hesitation in her movements as she stepped aside to let him in, her expression unreadable, like she was already miles away from me. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to do. The world around me felt like it was spinning in slow motion, and I was frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. As the door clicked shut behind them, the only sound that remained was the faint hum of the van pulling away. I stood there, staring at the door, my mind racing. What had just happened? What was she involved in? And why, for the first time, did I feel like I was the one left out? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the cool air biting at my skin, yet I couldn't move. My body had gone stiff, and my mind was racing 100 miles per hour, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Sophie, my wife, the woman I had built a life with, was opening the door to a man I didn't know, a man who had clearly been expected, a man who had delivered something to her with the sort of familiarity that no stranger should possess. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to march up to that door, open it, and demand answers. But something inside me froze. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, peering down into something dark and unknown, and I wasn't sure if I could handle the fall. The silence of the night enveloped me, and for a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the door as if it held the answers to every question I'd ever had about our relationship. But as I stood there, waiting, the question in my mind was becoming clearer. How long had this been going on? And why hadn't I noticed? I turned to go back inside, the weight of the situation starting to sink in, but just as I reached for the door, I heard something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A voice, faint but unmistakable, coming from the other side of the door. Sophie. It was hard to make out the words, but the tone in her voice wasn't what I had expected. There was no fear, no surprise. She sounded relaxed, almost calm. Too calm. My hand hovered over the doorknob as I tried to gather my thoughts. Was she in danger? Was something happening to her that I didn't know about? Or was this something she had been planning all along? The possibility felt like a cold slap to the face, and yet, it also felt strangely plausible. I couldn't deny it any longer. I had been blind to what was happening under my nose, and now I was left to figure out just how deep this rabbit hole went. Before I could convince myself to do anything else, I heard the sound of the front door opening again, followed by the soft thud of footsteps retreating into the distance. I quickly ducked behind the bushes, trying to stay out of sight, heart pounding in my chest. I watched as the stranger, walked toward the black van, his figure cutting through the darkness with an eerie confidence. He didn't hurry. He didn't look back. It was as though everything was going exactly as planned, like this was just another day in his life. Sophie, meanwhile, was nowhere in sight. The door was now fully closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she had just let a stranger into our home with the same nonchalance she might have let in a delivery man. What was going on here? What had I missed all this time? For the next few minutes, I stood there, barely able to breathe, my mind spinning with the possibilities. I wanted to march into the house and demand answers, but a voice in my head warned me that doing so might cause more harm than good. What if I was wrong? What if I was imagining things? Or worse, what if this was something I had been blind to for far too long? As I stood there, battling my own thoughts, I noticed the van's taillights flicker as it began to pull away. But just before it disappeared around the corner, something caught my eye. The man had stopped in the middle of the street and turned back toward the house. My breath caught in my throat as he glanced over his shoulder, his gaze sweeping the area as if he were making sure no one was watching. But it was too late. I had seen him. I had seen the way he moved, the way he acted. There was something dangerous in his calmness, something that made me uneasy. He wasn't just some random stranger. And then, just as quickly as he had turned, he climbed into the van and disappeared into the night. My heart was still pounding in my chest, my body still rigid with uncertainty. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. Sophie wasn't the woman I thought she was. Not anymore. I waited another 10 minutes, not sure what to do. Part of me wanted to go back inside, confront her, demand to know what was going on. But the other part of me, the part that had always been passive, that had always taken a back seat in our relationship, was terrified. Terrified of the truth. Terrified of what I might find out. Finally, I opened the door and stepped back into the house. The stillness was overwhelming. It was as though everything had gone back to normal, as if nothing had happened at all. But I knew better. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name. I walked through the living room, slowly, cautiously, as if expecting to find something that would shatter my entire world. And then I saw it. On the kitchen counter, lying next to her purse, was the black envelope. It was small, unmarked, and completely out of place. It seemed so insignificant, yet I couldn't take my eyes off it. Without thinking, I reached out and picked it up, my hands trembling slightly as I turned it over. There was no address, no return label, nothing. Just a smooth, matte surface, as if it had been placed there with a deliberate sense of secrecy. I knew I had to open it. I had to know what was inside. But as I began to peel open the seal, a sound came from behind me. The front door clicked shut. Sophie was home. I froze, my hand still holding the envelope, the fragile paper crinkling between my fingers. The sound of the front door closing behind me seemed so much louder in the stillness of the house. My heart began to race. I knew I wasn't supposed to be here, standing in the kitchen, holding something I wasn't meant to find. But there I was, caught between the urge to confront her and the paralyzing fear of what would happen if I did. Sophie's footsteps echoed through the hall. I quickly shoved the envelope into my pocket and turned to face her, trying to steady my breath, trying to act normal. But I could already feel my pulse thudding in my ears. She appeared in the doorway, a slight frown on her face, her coat still on, her hair slightly mussed from the wind outside. She gave me a quick, almost distracted glance, but said nothing. "Hey," I said, my voice coming out weaker than I had intended. "How was the meeting?" She shrugged, a casual gesture that struck me as too indifferent. "Same as usual. Late-night brainstorming session. You know how it is." I nodded, even though I had no idea what she was talking about. Late-night meetings? She'd never mentioned anything about them before. But then again, I had always just accepted things the way they were. Too trusting, too passive. I didn't question her because I didn't want to believe that anything could be wrong. I just wanted peace. But now, everything felt off. Sophie moved past me into the kitchen, tossing her coat onto the back of a chair before heading straight for the fridge. She pulled out a bottle of water, her back turned to me, giving me no chance to gauge her mood. The distance between us felt like a canyon now. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I married, felt like a stranger. "Where's your car?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going, trying to act like everything was normal. "It's parked around the corner," she replied without looking at me. "I don't want to block the driveway." I felt a pang of suspicion, but I pushed it down, not wanting to make her feel like she was being interrogated. She wasn't doing anything wrong, was she? The late-night meetings, the mysterious man, the black envelope. These were all just coincidences, right? I wanted to believe that. I really did. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I felt something gnawing at the back of my mind. Sophie took a sip of her water, then turned back to me. There was a strange look in her eyes, almost like she was studying me, waiting for something. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice suddenly softer than usual. "You've been acting kind of weird tonight." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain what I was feeling? How could I put into words that I was terrified of what I might discover, that I wasn't sure who she was anymore, that the trust one had in her was crumbling before my eyes? "I'm fine," I finally managed to say, though the lie tasted bitter on my tongue. "Just tired, I guess." She seemed to buy it, nodding and turning toward the living room. But I knew something had shifted. She was avoiding my gaze, and that made my heart race even faster. For the first time in our relationship, I felt like I was the one being shut out. I was the one who was no longer in control. As she walked past me, I glanced at the kitchen counter, my eyes once again drawn to the black envelope that was still hidden in my pocket. I didn't know what it contained, but I knew that I couldn't let it go. I needed to understand. I waited for a moment, listening to her moving around the house, the sound of her voice drifting from the living room as she picked up the phone to call someone. I didn't know who she was talking to, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't someone she should have been talking to, not behind my back. It was like I was in the middle of a puzzle, and the pieces were slowly starting to fall into place, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the full picture. I waited a few more minutes, trying to calm my racing thoughts. When I was sure Sophie was occupied, I pulled the envelope from my pocket and carefully opened it. The paper inside was thick and smooth, the kind that felt expensive to the touch. I unfolded it slowly, my hands trembling slightly, unsure of what I would find. The contents were simple, yet chilling. It was a letter written in neat, precise handwriting. I read it quickly, my eyes widening as I processed the words. "Meet us at the usual place tomorrow night. Midnight sharp. Don't keep us waiting." The words sent a cold shiver down my spine. The usual place? What the hell was that supposed to mean? And who was she meeting? Why hadn't she told me about it? I sat there, the letter in my hand, the weight of it settling heavily in my chest. I didn't know what to do with the information I had just uncovered. Was it a secret affair? A business deal? Or something worse? I felt sick to my stomach, my thoughts spinning out of control. The sound of Sophie's voice in the other room suddenly became louder, as if she had been waiting for me to react. I tucked the letter back into my pocket, my heart racing. I couldn't let her know I had seen it, not yet. Not until I knew what this was really about. But now, more than ever, I realized I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't turn away from. Whatever Sophie was hiding, it was much bigger than I had ever imagined. And I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. The night felt heavier now, suffocating in its silence. I sat there, in the kitchen, trying to make sense of everything, my mind spiraling out of control. The letter in my pocket was like a weight pressing against my chest. The usual place, it had said. Who was she meeting? And why hadn't she told me about it? Sophie, the woman I had spent years with, had always been open with me. Or so I thought. But now, everything felt like a lie, like I was the last one to know anything about her life. I stood up abruptly, the need to move, to do something, surging through me. I couldn't stay here any longer, stewing in my thoughts. I needed to know the truth. I couldn't just sit in the dark any longer. The first step, I told myself, was to find out where this usual place was. But how? Sophie was always careful with her words, always a step ahead. She had hidden this from me for so long, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the hallway, bringing me back to the present. Sophie was coming back into the kitchen, and I didn't know how to act. I couldn't let her know that I was unraveling, that I was losing control. I had to keep it together, even though every fiber of my being screamed to confront her, to demand answers. But that wasn't the man I was, at least not yet. I wasn't the man who could call her out without feeling like everything would shatter around me. I was a coward, always had been, and I had been hiding behind that cowardice for too long. Sophie walked into the kitchen, her presence filling the space in a way that both comforted and terrified me. She looked at me with that same unreadable expression, her eyes flickering briefly to my hands, which were still clenched around the edge of the counter. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked again, her voice a bit more concerned now. "You seem off tonight." I looked at her, trying to meet her gaze without revealing anything. I didn't want her to see the storm brewing inside me. I didn't want her to know how much I was falling apart. "I'm fine," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. "Just tired." Sophie's eyes lingered on me for a moment, as if searching for something. She seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "If there's something on your mind, you know you can talk to me." I swallowed hard. She wasn't acting like the woman I knew. Something about her tone, the way she spoke, felt off. It was as if she was playing a part, saying the right words, but not with any real meaning behind them. I wanted to believe her, wanted to think that she was still the person I married, but deep down, I knew that something had shifted. And whatever that shift was, it was pulling us further apart. "Nothing to talk about," I replied, forcing a smile. "Really?" Sophie didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the matter. Instead, she walked past me and grabbed a glass from the counter. The sound of the ice cubes clinking against the glass filled the otherwise quiet room. I couldn't take my eyes off her as she filled the glass with water, her back turned to me. I should have said something. I should have asked her who that man was, what she was doing, but I didn't. I just stood there, frozen in place, watching her as if she were a stranger. As she sipped her water, I heard the faintest sound, a phone vibrating. Sophie's phone, which she had left on the kitchen table, buzzed with a new notification. I glanced at it out of the corner of my eye, my pulse quickening. I could see the name that popped up on the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize. Sophie didn't seem to notice, too absorbed in her drink. But I did, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I shouldn't, but the temptation to look was overwhelming. I reached for the phone, my fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the table, and in that moment, I had a choice. I could turn away, pretend I hadn't seen it, and let the moment pass. Or I could look. I could see who had sent her a message at this hour, and I could start to unravel whatever she had been hiding from me. I picked up the phone. The message was short, just a few words. "Midnight tomorrow. Don't forget. Bring the envelope." I nearly dropped the phone. My mind raced, trying to piece together what this meant. Midnight. Tomorrow. The envelope. Was she planning to meet someone else again? Was this related to the man who had dropped off the letter? Why hadn't she told me about this? What was she involved in that she was hiding from me? I felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just about late-night meetings or mysterious phone calls. This was something bigger, something darker, and I was in way too deep to back out now. Just as I was about to read the message again, Sophie's voice interrupted my thoughts. "You're holding my phone," she said, sounding casual, but there was something in her tone that made my heart stop. I looked up, my face flushed with panic, but I quickly tried to recover. "Sorry," I said, handing the phone back to her. I thought I heard it vibrate. She took the phone from my hands without a word, her eyes briefly scanning me. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, something I couldn't quite place. Was it suspicion? Guilt? I couldn't tell. "Elliot," she said slowly, almost as if she were choosing her words carefully. Is everything really okay? You've been acting strange all night. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The truth was, I didn't know what was okay anymore. I didn't know how to act like everything was fine when I was staring down the abyss of a life I wasn't sure I recognized anymore. Sophie took a deep breath and set the phone down. She looked at me one last time, her expression unreadable, before she turned and left the room. The click of her footsteps echoed in the distance as I stood frozen, the weight of the phone's message still heavy in my mind. Tomorrow night. Midnight. The usual place. I had just crossed a line, and there was no going back. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed that message. Midnight tomorrow. Don't forget. Bring the envelope. I felt the weight of it pressing down on me, squeezing the air out of my lungs. Who was she meeting? What did she need to bring the envelope for? And why the hell had I never noticed how much she was hiding from me? I was supposed to be her husband. I was supposed to be the one she turned to, the one she trusted. And yet here I was, staring at the broken pieces of a life I thought I knew. The house felt colder now, empty in a way that was suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking around every corner, waiting to jump out and crush me. I had no idea what Sophie was involved in, but I could feel it. This wasn't just some random affair or business deal. No, this was something deeper, something far more dangerous. And I had no idea how far she was willing to go. I kept telling myself I had to confront her, ask her about the message, the man, the envelope. But every time I thought about it, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure if I should jump or pull back. Sophie had always been so confident, so self-assured, and I had spent so many years following her lead, letting her take control. But now, I was the one who felt out of control. She had been leading me into something I didn't understand, and I couldn't let it continue. The clock on the wall ticked on, and the minutes felt like hours. The house was silent, but the silence was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, felt like a warning. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, organizing the kitchen, anything to keep my mind from spiraling out of control. But nothing helped. I was stuck in a loop, caught between the desire to find out the truth and the fear of what that truth might be. By the time I heard Sophie coming down the stairs, I was already standing by the front door, pacing back and forth. She was dressed in her usual loose, comfortable clothes, her hair messy from sleep, but there was something about her that felt distant. She hadn't even looked at me as she walked past, her gaze fixed on the ground, her hands clutching the edges of her shirt as if she was trying to keep herself together. It was almost as if she were preparing for something. She made her way into the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and sat down at the table without saying a word. I watched her, my heart pounding in my chest, my thoughts racing. I wanted to ask her about the message, about the envelope, about the man, but I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to hear the lies, the explanations that I knew would only dig the hole deeper. But then, without warning, Sophie spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Elliot, we need to talk." Those words, "we need to talk," I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the kind of phrase that people used when everything was about to fall apart, when there was no more pretending. I wasn't ready for whatever she was about to say, but I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to know. I don't know how to say this, Sophie continued, her voice trembling slightly, as if she were fighting with herself over whether to reveal something she wasn't ready to admit. "There's a lot you don't know, and I don't know how to tell you. I've kept things from you, things I shouldn't have." My heart skipped a beat. I took a step closer to her, feeling the gravity of the moment settle in the pit of my stomach. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sophie hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if she were looking for an escape. Then, finally, she looked me dead in the eyes. "I'm sorry, Elliot. I never meant for you to find out like this. But I've been involved in something I didn't want you to know about. I've been keeping secrets from you. Big ones." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For the first time in years, I felt like I didn't know who she was. This wasn't the woman I had married, the woman I had spent all those years with. This was someone else. Someone who had been hiding a part of her life from me, a part one couldn't even begin to understand. "What are you involved in, Sophie?" I asked, my voice shaking now. I needed to know. The silence between us was unbearable, thick with the unspoken truth that neither of us could avoid anymore. Sophie bit her lip, her hands trembling as she set the glass down on the table. "I've been meeting with someone," she said, her voice barely audible. "Someone from my past. I didn't want you to know, because I didn't want to hurt you. But it's been going on for months now." I could feel my pulse quicken. Who? Who is this person? She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and fear. "His name is Lucas. He's someone I used to be close to before we met. I didn't want to drag you into this, but he's been asking for my help with something big." I felt my legs go weak as I absorbed her words. Lucas? Who the hell was Lucas? And why hadn't I ever heard about him before? And what kind of help did he need from her? She continued, her voice trembling now, as if she couldn't stop herself from revealing more. "It's not what you think. We're not together. But there are things I've done for him, things that I can't undo. He's in trouble, Elliot. He needs me. And I didn't know how to tell you without losing everything." My mind was spinning. Sophie had kept this man, Lucas, a secret from me for all these months. She had been meeting him, helping him, all while keeping me in the dark. It felt like a betrayal, a violation of everything I thought we had. I felt nauseous, my body numb as the reality of her words sank in. "Help him with what?" I asked, barely able to control the bitterness that seeped into my voice. Sophie didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the dark night as if she could find an escape there. "I can't explain it all right now," she said softly. "But I promise you, it's not what you think." But I wasn't sure I could believe her anymore. Something had broken between us, and I wasn't sure it could ever be fixed. "Then explain it to me," I demanded, my voice growing more desperate. "Tell me the truth, Sophie. Who is Lucas? What has he done to you?" She turned to face me, her expression pained. "I don't want to drag you into this. It's too dangerous." Dangerous. The word hung in the air like a threat. And that's when I realized, whatever this was, it was bigger than I could ever have imagined. I felt like the room was closing in around me. Sophie's confession had cracked something wide open, something I wasn't sure I could ever close again. The word dangerous lingered in the air, thick and oppressive. What did she mean by that? What had she gotten herself into? I stood there, frozen, not knowing how to respond, not knowing what was worse. The secret she'd been keeping from me, or the fact that she was now telling me only half of the story. Sophie was still standing by the window, her back to me, as if she were looking for something in the darkness outside, an escape, a way out of the mess she'd created. Her posture was stiff, almost defensive, and I could feel the distance growing between us, despite the fact that we were standing in the same room. The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, was slipping away before my eyes, and I didn't know how to hold on to her. "I don't understand," I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. "What do you mean, dangerous? What is Lucas involved in? And why didn't you tell me about this? About him? About any of it?" Sophie let out a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping. She didn't turn around immediately, but after a long moment, she spoke, her voice low and careful, as if weighing each word before it left her lips. "Lucas is complicated," she began, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "He's not like the people I've worked with before. He's involved in things that aren't legal. But it's not just about that. He's in trouble, Elliot. Big trouble. And he asked for my help. I couldn't just turn him away. I couldn't just walk away." I felt a rush of anger course through me, hot and sharp. "So, you've been helping him? Doing what exactly? What kind of trouble are we talking about here?" My heart was pounding, my hands trembling at my sides. This wasn't what I had expected. I hadn't been prepared for any of this. And the longer she stood there, not telling me everything, the more I could feel the threads of trust between us unraveling. Sophie's face twisted in a mixture of guilt and frustration. She took a deep breath before continuing, though her words seemed to hang heavy in the air. "I've been getting involved in his business. His illegal business. There, I said it. I didn't want to, but I couldn't get out. He doesn't have anyone else he can trust. And the deeper I've gone, the harder it's been to get out. But I've done things for him, things I can't undo." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer, each one reverberating in my chest. I had never seen this side of Sophie before. I had never imagined that she could be involved in something like this, something so far outside the life we had built together. She had always been my rock, my safe place, and now it felt like the ground was giving way beneath me. But why me, Sophie? I whispered, the words tumbling out of my mouth before I could stop them. Why didn't you come to me? I thought we were supposed to be partners in everything. You couldn't trust me enough to tell me the truth? Sophie's face crumpled slightly as she turned around to face me fully. She looked broken, and for a moment, I saw the woman I used to know. The woman who had laughed with me, cried with me, built our lives together. But it was fleeting. In the next instant, the mask was back, and she was guarded again, trying to hold on to the pieces of herself that were slipping through her fingers. I didn't want to hurt you, she said softly. I didn't want to bring you into this mess. I thought I could handle it on my own, that I could protect you from it. But I was wrong. And now, I don't know what to do. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to make sense of everything she was telling me. I didn't know who to be angry at, her for keeping this from me, or myself for not seeing it earlier. The worst part was the uncertainty. The feeling that I didn't know who she was anymore, that everything I had believed in had been built on a foundation of lies. So what now? I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of the question. What happens next? Are you still involved with him? Are you still helping him with whatever criminal stuff he's gotten you mixed up in? Sophie's eyes flickered with something, regret, maybe, or fear. She was holding something back, and I could feel it. The tension in the room was unbearable. I wanted answers, and yet, I was afraid to hear them. What if this was the beginning of the end for us? What if I couldn't forgive her, couldn't get past what she had done? The thought of losing her, of everything falling apart, was more than I could bear. I don't know what to do, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas is in too deep. He's made enemies. Real enemies. And I'm in the middle of it. I didn't want this to be my life, Elliot. I didn't want you to get dragged into it. But I don't know how to get out now. It's too late. I've already done things I can't undo. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She was in too deep, and she was pulling me into it whether I wanted to be or not. I shook my head, stepping back, trying to process everything she had just told me. So what's the plan? What are we supposed to do now? You're telling me you can't get out, but I don't even know if I can believe you anymore. Sophie opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, the sound of a car pulling up outside interrupted us. The engine was loud, the tires crunching on the gravel as the vehicle came to a stop. I glanced out the window, my heart skipping a beat when I saw the black van again. Who's that? I asked, my voice shaking now. Sophie's face went pale. She turned quickly, walking toward the door, but I was already on my feet, following her. She grabbed the handle, but before she could open it, I grabbed her arm. Sophie, who's coming? Who's in that van? My voice was demanding now, the fear and anger spilling over. She didn't look at me. Instead, she let out a heavy sigh and spoke in a barely audible voice. You don't need to know, Elliot. Just stay inside. Please. For your own good. But it was too late. I had already seen enough to know that whatever she was involved in, it wasn't something I could walk away from. I wasn't about to let her face whatever was coming alone. I'm coming with you, I said, pulling her arm gently but firmly. She turned to face me, her eyes wide with panic. No, Elliot, you don't understand. You can't. But I had made up my mind. I wasn't leaving her side. Whatever this was, whatever they were involved in, I needed to know. I needed to know how deep the rabbit hole really went. And at that moment, I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to walk away again. Sophie was pulling away from me now, her eyes wide with panic as she tried to unlock the door, her hands trembling. I could feel the tension in her every movement, the way she hesitated, as though there was something more she wasn't telling me. And for a split second, I felt it too. I felt the weight of the danger, the way everything was shifting in the air between us. This wasn't just about trust anymore. This was about survival. Please, Elliot, Sophie said, her voice a shaky whisper as she tugged at the door handle, clearly desperate to leave, to keep whatever was waiting for her outside a secret. You don't know what you're doing. This is dangerous. You don't understand. I can't let you get involved in this. I wasn't sure if it was the fear in her voice or the way her hands were shaking that made me take a step closer to her. But I could feel my resolve hardening. I'm already involved, Sophie, I said, my voice firm, louder than I had intended. You've dragged me into this. Whether you like it or not, I'm not walking away from you. Not now. Not after everything. Sophie's breath caught, and she stopped trying to open the door. She turned to face me, her eyes wide, Her lips slightly parted as if she were trying to find the words to convince me to stop. But I could see it now. The fear in her eyes wasn't just for herself. It was for both of us. She knew, deep down, that this wasn't just about Lucas or the things she had done for him. This was about what would happen to us, to our lives, once the truth came out. The sound of the van's engine shutting off outside sent a shiver down my spine. The tension in the air thickened. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I looked at Sophie, and for a moment, I could see everything unraveling. The life we'd built, the trust we'd shared. It was all slipping through my fingers. "I need to go," Sophie said quietly, pulling away from me. "I have to meet them. I don't have a choice." Before I could say anything, she opened the door and stepped outside, her eyes darting around nervously. I followed, my heart racing. I couldn't just let her walk into whatever this was. Not without knowing what it meant for us. What it meant for our future. The cold night air hit me like a wall as I stepped onto the porch, and I saw the black van parked a few feet away. Two men were standing outside, their figures looming in the dim streetlights, their faces hidden in the shadows. One of them stepped forward as Sophie approached, his movements slow, calculated. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes on me. He wasn't looking at Sophie, he was looking at me. "I told you not to get involved," Sophie said softly, her voice barely audible as she stood in front of the man. I could see the way her body stiffened, the way she was bracing herself for something she couldn't control. The man didn't answer her right away. Instead, he glanced at me with a cold, detached look. "She's brought someone else," he said to Sophie, his voice low, rough. "You didn't say he'd be coming." Sophie stiffened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. She glanced at me, her eyes pleading. "Elliot, you don't have to do this. You don't need to be here. Please, just go back inside." But I wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not after everything. "No," I said firmly, stepping forward. "I'm staying. Whatever this is, I'm not letting you face it alone." The man turned toward me then, his face emerging from the shadows, and I saw him clearly for the first time. He was tall, his features sharp and angular, his expression cold. He didn't look like someone who dealt in legal business. This was the kind of man who carried his weight in silence, someone who didn't need to speak to make his presence known. He stepped closer, a slow smile curling at the corner of his lips. "You've made a mistake, my friend," he said in a voice that sounded like gravel scraping against metal. "You should have stayed out of this." Sophie took a step back, her eyes flicking between the man and me. "Please, just go back inside, Elliot," she said again, her voice strained, as though she were trying to protect me from something that was already beyond saving. But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I wasn't going to back down, not when I knew that there was so much more going on here than I could understand. The man was right about one thing. I had made a mistake. I had made the mistake of thinking I could stand by and do nothing while my wife, the woman I loved, got pulled into something this dark. But it wasn't just her life on the line anymore. It was ours. "You think this is going to end well, don't you?" I said, my voice rising with a mix of frustration and fear. "You think you can just walk away from all this, but you're wrong. Whatever this is, I'm not going to let you keep hiding it from me." The man's smile faded, and for a moment, I saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes. He took another step closer, and I could feel the weight of his gaze. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice growing colder. "You're in over your head, pal, and you're about to find out just how deep this goes." I stood my ground, my heart hammering in my chest, and then I turned to Sophie. "Tell me the truth. Right now? Everything. I need to know what's going on before this goes any further." Sophie looked at me, her eyes filled with guilt and regret. "Elliot, Before she could finish, the man raised a hand, cutting her off. "Enough talking," he said sharply. He turned to the second man standing by the van and nodded. The other man stepped forward, a glint of something cold in his eyes. "I don't think we need to waste any more time with this," the first man said, his voice turning menacing. "We're not here for a chat. We're here to finish business." My heart skipped a beat. I could feel the ground slipping out from under me, and I realized then that everything I had been trying to avoid, the truth, the danger, the consequences, had caught up with me. And now, there was no turning back. The tension in the air was suffocating. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, each second dragging on like hours. Sophie's gaze flickered between the man and me, and I could see the fear in her eyes. a fear I hadn't seen before. She was trapped, and I had just stepped into the lion's den with her. I had no idea what these men were capable of, but I wasn't about to back down. Not now, not after everything. But just as the situation seemed like it was about to explode, something inside me clicked. I couldn't let fear control me. I couldn't let these men, whoever they were, intimidate me into submission. I had to do something. I had to take control of the situation for both of us. I stepped forward, placing myself between Sophie and the two men, my voice steady but loud. "This isn't how it ends," I said, my words cutting through the tension like a knife. "I don't know what kind of trouble you're involved in, but I won't let you drag her deeper into it. You want to do business? Fine, but not on our terms. You'll leave here, and you'll leave her out of this mess." The first man, the one who had been speaking to me all night, narrowed his eyes at me. I could see the challenge in his gaze, the calculation as he tried to size me up. But I didn't back down. I stood my ground, my fists clenched at my sides, ready for whatever came next. For a moment, there was silence. The air seemed to crackle with unspoken words, the weight of the moment hanging between us. Sophie was behind me, barely making a sound, but I could feel the tremble in her hands as she reached out, her fingers brushing against my back. She was scared, but in that moment, I felt like I was the one protecting her for a change. Then, to my surprise, the man took a step back. He didn't say anything at first, just studied me with an unreadable expression. The second man, who had been standing silently by the van, shifted his weight and glanced at the first one. There was a brief exchange of silent communication, something I couldn't understand but felt like a signal. After a long pause, the first man spoke again, his voice surprisingly calm. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, his tone no longer threatening. "But this isn't a game, pal. You don't know who you're dealing with." "I don't need to know," I shot back, my voice growing stronger. "But I know who she is, and that's enough for me. She's my wife, and I'll protect her from whatever's happening here." The man stared at me for another moment, as if weighing my words. I could feel the intensity of his gaze, but I refused to look away. Sophie's fingers tightened on my shoulder, and I could feel her relief. She knew something was shifting, too. Finally, the man sighed and nodded, as if making a decision. "Fine," he said, his voice cold but not as sharp as before. "You want out, you got it. But don't ever think this is over. We don't forget, and we don't forgive easily." I nodded, determined not to show weakness. "We're done. Stay away from us." With that, the two men turned and walked back to the van, their footsteps slow but purposeful. As they climbed inside, I felt the weight in my chest lift just a little. The van's engine roared to life, and without another word, they sped off into the night, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, motionless, my heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. We had made it out. We had won. Sophie finally stepped up beside me, her voice shaky but grateful. You really stood up to them," she said, her eyes wide with something I hadn't seen in a long time, admiration. I turned to face her, finally letting out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "I had to. I couldn't let them take you any deeper into this. I love you, Sophie, and I don't care what's happened or how messed up this situation is. We'll figure it out together." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached for my hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I was wrong." I shook my head, squeezing her hand. "We don't keep secrets from each other, Sophie, but we can fix this. Together. You don't have to do this alone anymore." For the first time that night, a real smile broke through on her face, a mixture of relief and gratitude. We were standing on the edge of something uncertain, but in that moment, it felt like we had everything we needed, each other. The sky above us was starting to lighten, the first hints of dawn breaking through the darkness. We walked back into the house, hand in hand, leaving the night's shadows behind. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like we could face it. Together.